As we've been telling you, the United Nations held a Security Council meeting just a while ago now, and we're getting some of the reaction to that meeting. Here is the U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power.
Has the assets and resources that it needs to fulfill its mandate. To that end, the United States has just circulated a draft resolution responding to the Secretary General's request that the Council increase UNMISS's troop ceiling. As we have discussed, the crisis must be resolved through a negotiated solution of political differences, and our Special Envoy, Don Booth, was in Juba today to help with mediation efforts. I'm pleased to report that Special Envoy Booth was able to meet with the 11 detained opposition leaders, and he found them to be secure and well, and very open to ending the crisis through dialogue and reconciliation. So that was an important step today. We're also encouraged at the news that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights will be strengthening the work of the UNMISS Human Rights Office to begin immediately recording the basic facts about any atrocities and human rights abuses that are occurring. This is a priority, and it must happen immediately to be most effective. Those who commit atrocities may feel immune now, and thus the more that we show that we are documenting these abuses and that people will be held accountable, the more likely we are to be able to affect their calculus. Those responsible for violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law must be held accountable, and that's something also that the Security Council agrees upon. The future of South Sudan is in jeopardy, and this moment demands urgent leadership to avoid further bloodshed and to restore stability. When South Sudan was born a short 2.5 years ago, the United States proudly stood with its people and its leaders as this much anticipated new state came into existence. As President Obama has said, now is the time for South Sudan's leaders to show courage and actual leadership, to reaffirm their commitment to peace, to unity, and to the better future for their people that they have promised. The leaders of South Sudan face a stark choice. They can return to the political dialogue and spirit of cooperation that helped establish South Sudan, or they can destroy those hard-fought gains and tear apart their newborn nation. Before I go to your questions, which I will do imminently, I'd like also just to take a moment here to discuss two other issues that I think require all of our attention. The first is Syria. On Sunday, a reported 25 civilians were reported killed in Aleppo due to attack by Syrian government forces using so-called barrel bombs that are packed with high explosives and shards of metal deliberately designed to kill as many people indiscriminately as possible. The attacks over the weekend killed more than 300 people, many of them children. I strongly condemn, and the United States strongly condemns, these deadly strikes, which have no purpose other than to sow terror and to drive people from their homes. The attacks have exacerbated the already severe humanitarian crisis in Syria by making it more difficult to supply medical facilities in Aleppo, including the city's largest trauma and surgical hospital, which is in one of the neighborhoods that is being bombed ruthlessly. Instead of preparing in good faith for talks aimed at ending the violence in Syria, the Assad regime continues to perpetrate atrocities against its own people. In September, when the UN Security Council authorized the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons, we made it clear that a red light for one weapon must not become a green light for another. And I join the UN Joint Special Representative Lakhdar Brahimi in calling on the regime, as he put it, to stop the use of these devastating barrel bombs immediately and to cooperate fully in allowing international humanitarian and relief workers to do their jobs. Finally, as you know, I just returned from the Central African Republic, where I had the chance to witness just how dire the situation is on the ground. And even as we discuss the situation in South Sudan and, of course, discuss Syria, I want to just say that the situation in CAR begs the world's attention. Terrible atrocities have occurred. Terrible atrocities are occurring. We met with one woman whose husband had been stabbed in front of her, his body then doused in gasoline and then set on fire in front of her very eyes. Part of what those who have survived violence of this nature are crying out for is justice. And one of the worries that we came away from the Central African Republic with was that those who are not seeing justice be done are increasingly tempted to take matters into their own hands, and that you're seeing a cycle of retribution and violence that is very, very alarming. The other thing I heard on the positive side from almost everyone I spoke with was we have a tradition of religious coexistence and religious harmony. We've lived this way for a long time. Almost everyone you meet tells a story of an intermarriage, usually his or her own, or being the child of an intermarriage across faiths. And people described Catholic children, going to schools, going and being instructed by the imam, and Muslim children being instructed by the local Catholic priest or the Protestant priest. This is the kind of intermingling that has existed for a long time, and the people of the Central African Republic want the world to know about that. But it is incredibly important, again, that we support the African Union, the French, and moderate voices in the Central African Republic so that that vision for CAR prevails. With that, why don't I take a few questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Two questions. First, on South Sudan, is the United States ready to respond to the Secretary General's request for help in transporting the additional troops, police, and equipment to South Sudan? And secondly, Ambassador Churkin just said that, yes, there was council support, but he questioned some of what he called editorial comments in the U.S. draft resolution, and I wonder if you could tell us what he might be referring to.
Let me take that question first. He seemed very supportive of the need to both approve the Secretary General's notional plan and to move very quickly. So that was the overarching message. And I'm not sure, again, what he was referring to as he departed. But again, overwhelming consensus, overwhelming desire to move quickly, very significant alarm on the part of council members by the accounts by Edmund and others of the possibility of imminent confrontations at UN bases where civilians are gathered. I mean, this was not a politicized or ideological or editorial meeting. This was a meeting where everybody was scratching their heads to see and rolling up their sleeves to see how can we help as quickly as possible. And we recognize that it's not, even when the Security Council has authorized this increase in troops and this intermission cooperation, the delivery on those sort of force realignments will not be immediate. And so that's, again, another reason for the urgency, both the gravity of the situation on the ground, the sense that worse could come, and the recognition that it's going to take at least a few days to actually move resources. On the question about the U.S. disposition toward the request, honestly, the level at which we have received it now is very, very high level. It is referring to specific missions from which they would recommend deploying and moving troops, and this comes back to an earlier question I think that was asked, where they assess that those troops can be loaned without doing damage to the extant sort of source country mission. And so I think they have gone through that exercise themselves on the specifics of how troops would be lifted, or again, what the general means by which these redeployments would occur. Those proposals have not yet come to us, at least did not come to us in this meeting.
Sure. Thanks, Ambassador. Does the resolution put a time limit on the increase in the authorised number of troops for South Sudan? And the former Vice President said today that he was willing to start negotiating if those 11 prisoners were released. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, there's no resolution yet. We're still negotiating it, and we actually got some I thought, very thoughtful comments from a number of delegations. So we'll need to incorporate them. Again, everyone's on the same page, so it's just about creating the best product possible, recognizing that we're eager to move this ASAP. One of the questions that is on the table is how quickly we would wish the Secretary General to report back to the Council. And I think one of the things that we're all in agreement of is both in terms of the ground situation and whether these redeployments themselves will provide this sufficient reinforcements in order to perform civilian protection, in order to ensure that UN peacekeepers themselves are also not isolated and vulnerable in the way that some of them have been. So that's one question. And then the other will be what has been the effect on the missions from which those troops have been drawn. So I think that would lead all council members to wish to continue to check in with the Secretary General and to do so quite quickly. With regard to Riek Machar's comments, which I believe he made to Reuters by coincidence, I guess what I would say is we were encouraged that President Kiir licensed Special Envoy Booth to go and see the detainees and also then followed through on that. There had been a previous commitment to IGAD because those ministers also wanted to visit with the detainees. So we take this as an important step in the right direction. And President Kiir has said that he will sit down for negotiations with no preconditions. Riek Machar has now laid this out as his precondition. So there's clearly a big difference between them on a whole host of fronts, this included, and we're going to have to work that through because for as long as these two individuals are at loggerheads refusing to sit down with one another, innocent people are being killed on nothing other than ethnic grounds in South Sudan.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All right, there you have it. Let me lose this picture here. We'll talk about the central actors in this in just a second. John Terrett is with me here as we sort through what was said by the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, just moments ago.
She said the key line right there.
Yeah.
That was it. As
Tell me what
long
we do
as
here.
the two leaders are refusing to sit down and talk.
Riek Machar, the former vice president.
He was fired by Salva
Salva
Kiir
Kiir.
back in July.
Yeah.
And he's holed up now in Unity Province, which is where all the oil is.
Right.
And Salva Kiir has accused him of launching a coup for the entire country. And there's Samantha Power, the United States ambassador to the UN, saying, look, as long as these two long-time rivals,
Yeah.
they've never liked each other, even when they were in the cabinet.
Well, they have the same ambitions. They both want to run the country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she's saying, look, as long as these two refuse to talk, innocent people are going to die, many of them along ethnic lines.
Yeah.
And she was saying there that the Security Council has drafted a resolution which is now being passed around member nations and will be sent back to capital cities tonight. And there could be a vote on this tomorrow, Tuesday. And the basic tenet is to beef up the peacekeeping force there by about 5,000 extra peacekeepers, the blue helmets that you see,
Yeah.
and around 400 policemen as well. All of this in South Sudan, and all of this to try and stop this incredible violence which is going on there right now.
So what's the mission? What is the mission? Certainly, is it mission to protect civilians,
Well,
to
the
get
US
civilians out of the country, or is it to somehow mediate this dispute? What then becomes the mission?
I think what you have to remember, what is never very clear from looking at the map, is just how big these countries are.
Yeah.
You can't police them. They're
Right.
huge. It's almost impossible. So the best you can do is to send peacekeepers in to try and stop the two sides from killing
So
each
that
other.
gets to the number, and is the number enough, right?
And the US has another mission going on. It announced today it's sending 150 Marines to nearby Djibouti, just in case these tough guys need to come in
Yeah.
and evacuate the embassy, which at the moment has
So let's
about
get to brevity.
100 people inside.
You mentioned that these two guys, longtime rivals, don't
Yeah.
care for one another.
Yeah.
Have the same ambitions. That's to run the country. Salva Kiir is the president right now. Riek Machar has ambitions. He's thought of as a very ambitious man and wants to
That's
run
right.
the country.
Yeah.
He, as you mentioned, is holed up essentially in unity. And the position that puts the president right now is, what do I do about this situation in unity? Do I send my troops in to recapture this territory, which he has said, there he is, there's Salva Kiir right there, which he has said he will do. And we know what that means. That would mean a lot of bloodshed. That would mean intense fighting and a lot of bloodshed and civilians caught in the middle of this.
What
correct?
you've got to remember with the country of South Sudan is that it's the world's newest country. It only came into being in 2011.
Yeah.
It's 60% Christian. There are 200 different ethnic groups there. We don't know for sure who shot at the American soldiers on Saturday. It could have been any one of about 200 groups. And that really is the basic issue that you have. It's a very tribal society.
And we have to...
Pulling it together is tough.
It is really tough. We'll continue to talk about this plenty. John, appreciate it. Thanks for your time.